Hi everyone. So we are back with the book of VANYA, a true story by Myrna Grant. And we are at the moment at chapter 3. And to read you the Russian proverb that every chapter starts with, no threshold without God. It was almost 2 in the morning, and Ivan's head was swimming with sleep. It was colder in Odessa than it had been in Moldavia. The snow was not yet deep, but its surface was frozen and slippery as the draftees jumped down from the oppressive warmth of the army trucks that had brought them from the train station. Now, as they half slid, half ran to keep up with an escort car that directed them to a cluster of buildings ahead in the darkness, Ivan tried to make sense out of the confusion of voices calling from different places in the darkness. "Over here, quickly! Convoy's an hour late. We've been waiting out here for 1 hour. Standard attention! What's the matter with all your stranglers? Quickly now! How are you going to be assigned to beds at this hour? I'd like to know. There's a regulation that all new arrivals must be here before 10 p.m. What do you want to do, then? Stand them in the cold all night? Who's to give the welcome? Where's Karetko? Someone run for Karetko. They are there. A dim figure in the great coat and scarf, wrapped almost to the tip of his officer hat, clumsily mounted a few steps off the building before which the freezing group had come to a halt. He addressed them in muffled shouts. Because of the lateness of the hour, he barked greetings would be brief and the men would be dismissed to their barracks for the night. The barracks were the large buildings facing directly onto the square in which they were standing. As they could see in the floodlights, the buildings were 5 stories high. Each floor of each building consisted of 6 dormitories, each one accommodating 32 soldiers. So there would be 192 men to a floor. The men had received coupons on the train designating the number of their barrack, their floor, and their room. Officers were present who would direct new soldiers to their bunks. The officer paused suddenly to clear his throat, pull his scarf out of the way, and spit emphatically into the snow. They would be awakened at 6 a.m. by a bugle call. They would have 5 minutes to get up and dressed and make their beds. At the time, they would receive further instructions. Dismissed. The muffled figure wheeled into the open door behind him. Immediately, a frenzied kaleidoscope of activity began. Officers sprang to life, pushing, shouting, and scattering small groups of men in different directions. Inside the barracks, the weary draftees pushed through the rows of bunks in the glare of bare light bulbs in the ceiling. In a search, hurried by the cries of officers, they looked for numbers that corresponded to the rumpled blue coupons they held in their hands, like so many late theatergoers looking for their seats after the first act curtain. Accents strange to Ivan filled the rooms. Lithuanians making themselves understood in broken Russian, Belarusians, the famous Moscow accent blending with the slower, softer speech of the north. And at every turn, the blur of fatigue that churned the whole mosaic of bunks, arms, legs, laughter, and cursing into a tumble of unreality. By morning, a light snow was falling. Tiny flakes fell on his lashes and the rim of his bugle as Boris Yakovlevich Frolov raised his instrument for revel. grimly pointed it at the windows on the third floors of the barracks where he knew the new recruits had been taken during the night. Never too soon to discover the rigors of army life. Taking a blast of cold air into his lungs, he blew. Only too well he could imagine the scene in those rooms. The apprehensive rush to get dressed, not to be left behind, not to be singled out as slow or stupid. The strangeness of their new uniforms would begin now, and the mutual sizing up and the cold walk to the mess hall for a breakfast of fish and tea. The first day of running from drill to class, to orientation to meals, to gymnastics, was upon them. He blew the bugle again in an opposite direction. For him, only 11 months left. That was something to be thankful for. Already the men in his own unit were hurrying out of the barracks, stripped to the waist for running. They would cover their course of 15 kilometers in the hour before breakfast. Boris Jaco Flewig lowered his bugle and marched the goose step to his barracks. Perhaps today at target practice he would save a bullet for himself. It was an idea that haunted him. The important thing Ivan was thinking as he made his way to the dining hall is to find a place to pray. Already the crowds of soldiers, the noise in the barracks, the difficulty in being alone pressed upon him. Even the bare poplar trees he passed huddled together in thickets as if it would be suspect to grow in solitude. The smoky smell of sturgeon hung over the vast mess hall as Ivan joined a long line for the mugs of tea that steamed invitingly in the cold. At home at this hour, he would be praying. Prayer times were easy to arrange at home. Even in the busy days when he was taking his chauffeur's training at the institute, there were hours in which he could pray before his train left for the city. In the winter, on a morning like this, 2 of the younger children would be bedded on top of the kitchen stove, hunched together for warmth. It had been pleasant to pray beside them as they slept, their regular breathing undisturbed in the soft rising and falling of his voice. Perhaps after the meal he could look for a quiet place. The plates of fish were empty now, but every one of the 30 soldiers at the table were still hungry, passing the plates of dark bread up and down until they too were bare. An orderly moved along the rows of tables with a huge kettle of tea, slopping out extras of the tepid drink into uplifted metal cups. A feeling of loneliness tightened Ivan's throat. It was as he expected, of course, but perhaps he had underestimated the enormity of the task ahead of him. Each person seemed caught up in a microcosm of his own, choking down the last dregs of tea, wiping up a plate with a crumbed bit of bread, climbing over the bench, deftly balancing plate and cup, hurrying to the door, stopping to chat with a friend made on the train. Lines of soldiers pressed in at the entrance as others pushed through them into the icy November dawn. Confess me before men, and I will acknowledge you before the angels of God. There was no questioning that voice that had spoken so many times in his spirit. Ivan put his fork and spoon in the mug on his plate and lifted himself back over the bench, moving with the others toward the door. The first thing to do was to find a place to pray. Staff Sergeant Strelkov had a long, smooth face with hollow cheeks he sucked in when irritated. For 2 weeks, he had been trying to get the new unit in shape. 2 weeks of the invariable questions, disorder, and interruptions he detested. A clump of icy mud clung to his boot, and he kicked it off impatiently. The new lot was a poor bunch. His eyes narrowed in the cold, shifted to the place in the shivering formation where a man was missing. Movement on the near edge of the drill grounds caught his eye. He watched impassively as the strangler approached in a desperate run. It was Moiseyev. Gasping for breath, he took his place in the line. Not a man moved so much as a sideways glance. Stalkov was slightly gratified. Perhaps a lesson could be made of this. Give your reason for being late, Comrade Private Moiseyev. Stalkov's disciplined bearing was mute witness to the fact that he himself had never once been late. Ivan's bare chest was heaving from the long run across the field. Uneasily he viewed the ramrod form of the sergeant as he steadied his breathing. A tension slowly built in the formation as Strelkov's question awaited an answer. I'm sorry, sir. I was praying, sir. Strelkov stared. There was no hint of the buffoon in Moiseyev's grave expression. Someone in the line coughed suddenly. Strelkov glared at the motionless men. Did they think he didn't know they were suffocating with laughter? Strelkov had been in the army long enough to know how to handle irregularities. You will drill with the unit, Moiseyev. When we have completed the exercises, you will report to me. He stepped back to address the formation, his orders scattering the men to different sections of the field to begin their drills. In an instant, the grounds were alive with bodies leaping, jogging, arms flashing in exercise formations. Ivan longed to throw himself into performing the calisthenics, to purge himself of the shame of being late, of abusing the wonderful gift the Lord had given him. How easy it had been to rejoice at finding an unused office for a prayer room. The old babushka sweeping the floor had assured him the room was not in use until 10 in the morning. She herself unlocked the door at 5 when she came to clean. Praise had rolled over Ivan every morning since, as the stillness of the place settled in on his soul. There was a leather chair so that he could kneel on the floor, leaning his elbows on the seat, shielded by its generous back from a cracked window. But to forget the time, to be late for drill. With a renewed pang of embarrassment, he heard Strelkov calling him again. The sergeant's atheism was third generation. His grandfather had been of the earliest Bolsheviks, a midshipman on the battleship Aurora, who had been fought in the streets of Leningrad during the revolution. During the Great Patriotic War, his father had been an officer in the siege of Leningrad, and had died of wounds and hunger in the last days of the siege. His Communist Party card had been in his pocket when he died. Strelkov carried his father's card next to his own, in his wallet. He was disturbed by the presence of what he called bourgeois remnants in the army. He rubbed his gloves together and began walking, indicating with a jerk of his hand Ivan was to follow. What's this about praying, Moiseyev? You weren't joking? No, sir. Then what's the matter with you? Nothing, sir. I feel fine. Orthodox? Are you a churchman? Stroukoff tried to think of today, if today was a religious day for the Orthodox. Every now and then there would be incidents on religious days. No, sir. Baptist. That was worse. Baptists were unpredictable and stubborn. In the Komsomol, Strelkov had conducted anti-religious seminars in rural communities. The Baptists attended, but they frequently gave such lengthy answers to religious questions that it was difficult to best them. That won't do here, Mosev. Praying? Religion? Not in the Red Army. It is unfortunate to find religious survivals anywhere in Soviet life, but especially so in a young man training in the army of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. It is certain that you will have to change your ideas. Ivan continued walking silently with the officer, wondering if an answer was expected of him. I'm sure after you make some friends, begin to enjoy army life a little more, you will see the childishness of your religious ideas. It was only after Russia threw off the shackles of the Tsar and the Church that she was able to become strong. It is the same for a man. In spite of his greatcoat, Stalkov was getting chilled. He ought to be inside at his desk. He glanced at Ivan. His skin was bright with the cold. Stalkov stood stamping with his valenki in the snow and watching as Ivan ran across the field to his unit. In spite of his knee-length felt boots, Strelkov's feet were getting cold, and he had missed his morning tea. It had not been a satisfactory interview. The other men had heard Mosev say he had prayed. The Pollet officer would have to be notified. Now here is some something written here at the bottom, small writing here, and I will read that now. In the USSR, the word Baptist is a general term meaning Protestant, as contrasted with churchman, which refers to a member of the Russian Orthodox Church. There are two groups of Protestants: the government-registered All-Union Council of Evangelical Christians or Baptists, AUCECB, and the unregistered, illegal Council of Churches of Evangelical Christians or Baptists, CCECB. The Moisevis worship with a CCECB congregation, which is the illegal one. We continue. The Pollet Rolk, now that is the shortened term for Political Directive Department. The Pollet Rock office was poorly lit. The faint winter light that struggled to enter the room was in part blocked by limp green drapes that hung desperately over the grimy glass. The Pollet officer was Captain Boris Zalivakov, a hammer of a man, short and powerfully built, with inscrutable bushy brows. A matter of unpunctuality was of no interest to him, but Strelkov's story, if it were not a poor joke of Mosev, was. Waiting for Mosev to arrive, Strelkov had misgivings. Perhaps he should not have taken Mosev seriously. He wished he had not conversed with him. He had hoped to give him some advice, to help him along. But it might well be that Mosevev had made a fool of him. At least the main information could verify that he said he had been praying. He wouldn't be able to deny it. How many had actually heard him? Straukov tried to remember who had been standing close enough to hear. Captain Salivako glanced lazily at Mosevev, standing at attention on the other side of the table. His side cap was the proper angle. He had saluted correctly and with respect. Salivako's interest was slightly stirred by the ease with which Mosevev met his look. The young fellow was sure of himself, but there was no hint of insolence in his expression. Salivako motioned for him to sit down. You don't look like the sort that would be late for a drill. What is the problem that you cannot manage to report on time with the rest of your unit? I am very sorry, Comrade Captain, for my tardiness. It won't happen again. You didn't answer my question. What explanation do you give for being late? There was a tightening of Salivako's voice. He disliked evasiveness. I was praying, sir. The answer hung in the air, almost visible in his strangeness. Straukov took a deep breath with relief. He had been quite right to report Mosevev. Everyone knew religion was a menace to the Soviet way of life, in whatever harmless form it might appear. Lenin himself had said that the goal for the Communist Party was to free the working masses from the idea of religion. Straukov straightened himself conspicuously. Salivako tapped his fingers. To whom were you praying? To God, sir, the creator of the universe, who loves all men. To God? Salivako closed his eyes in a deep sigh. It has been scientifically proven that God does not exist. Our Soviet scientists have studied this question thoroughly, and they have verified the teachings of scientific communism that there is no God. The idea of God was invented by early men to explain economic conditions that could not be understood in primitive times. That is what atheists teach, sir. That is the correct view. That is the position of the communist government, the Academy of Sciences, and every other great institution of Soviet life, including the Soviet Department of Defense. This is the position of the Soviet peoples. Comrade Polite Officer, I know atheism is our official view, but the Bible teaches that God made man after he created the entire universe. That is the Christian belief. Salivako had been writing on a report sheet before him on the desk. He paused in his work. You have a Bible? No, sir. The Bible is not a welcome book in the Soviet Union. It is full of unscientific errors of all kinds. It promotes passivity and subservience. It is not permitted in the army. In fact, I can't understand why anyone would read such a book. It changes lives, sir. The army changes lives, Mosref, and opinions. Perhaps you need assistance in realizing this. It is far more profound truth than anything your Bible declares. I am eager to serve in the army to the best of my ability. Salivago began to be angry. Religious recruits were difficult to deal with. Believers were deceptive. Outwardly they appeared to be good citizens, quiet, peace-loving, harmless people. And under the cover of virtue, they spread their false teachings. I am happy to hear you say that, Mosref. Such a statement naturally means that you have decided to throw off your subversive ideas about God and enter fully into the program that has been planned to develop you as fully as possible into a Soviet soldier, unquestioning in your loyalty to the state. I congratulate you. Strelkov glanced admiringly at Captain Salivago. The Politruck knew how to handle men. But Salivago was continuing, ignoring the distress on Moisev's face. I will take special interest in your political development and in your participation in the full range of military and political activities required of you. Salivago rose from his chair, watching Mosev intently as he waited for his response. The boy would be a fool not to take the exit he had been given. But believers were fools to start with. He wished Moisev's Russian were better. It was tiresome to listen to his halting speech. I am happy as a Soviet citizen to serve in the army and to help build socialism in any way I can. But there is another place of which I am a citizen, and that is the kingdom of God. It is a kingdom that can never be a threat to the Soviet state, because this kingdom is within the hearts of believers, and the laws of this place are the laws of love. I cannot renounce my citizenship in this kingdom or my loyalty to the King, who is God. He is building his kingdom everywhere, even in the Soviet Union, a kingdom of forgiveness and love. Salivago's voice began to shake as he answered. We have done away with kingdoms in the Soviet Union, Mosev, and with kings. Perhaps in your zeal you have somehow forgotten that fact. We have places only for those loyal to the Soviet state, nothing else. Strelkov was deflated. He had hoped to see a demonstration of how smoothly these matters could be handled. And it was incredible to him that any Soviet youth could have been so thoroughly poisoned by religion. But Salivago was not finished. It is evident that you resist teaching, Mosev, and the advice of your superiors. That is a concern to me. You are in need of a lesson. Since you are fond of praying on your knees, I shall give you an opportunity for constructive socialist labor in that position. You are to wash the barracks drill hall and all the corridors on your knees with a bucket and brush. You will work all night. Perhaps an exercise of this nature and before your comrades might help to persuade you to be teachable. You will have opportunity to consider if you wish to cling to your anti-Soviet views. Dismissed. Strakov stood smartly to his attention, saluting Captain Solivalko. The matter had been brought to a satisfactory conclusion. A good feeling passed briefly between the two men as Mosevev saluted and left the room. Such degrading labor would teach Mosevev what knees were for. Before the pale December sun had climbed halfway to the top of the frozen sky, the news of a believer in the unit had passed through the whole company. Smiles appeared as the story spread from man to man, with heads shaking or shoulders shrugging in amusement or disinterest. Fast upon the first story came the second, that the Pollard Rock had set Mosevev to scrubbing the enormous barrack hall with a small hand brush and a bucket. Incredibly, he was in good humor, singing and smiling as he worked in spite of continuous interruptions by officers who called him into their offices to harass him. By lunch, soldiers were drifting into the hall on their way to the dining rooms, watching him work, listening to the quiet hymns he sang with such evident joy. He was a mystery. Next time, chapter 4 of VANYA. See you again. Bye.